Sometimes dead is better. The soul of a man's heart is stonier, Louis. A man who lies about beer makes enemies. Judd Crandall, perhaps the untold guardian of the Pet Sematary's dark secret. The Halloween season, a time of stories and memories, often about those who have departed this world. A time of remembering those who were with us before but have now moved on to hopefully better places. Because like leaves on a tree, our time on earth is surprisingly limited, and the time for us to fall can come faster than we would likely expect. Anyway, hi, hello, and welcome again everybody to another episode of Natural Juan. In this episode, I'll be discussing Stephen King's Pet Sematary, perhaps his most terrifying story of all. Before all that though, I'd like to dedicate this video to none other than my late Uncle Ray. Yes, that third quote from Judd Crandall is for you, Uncle Ray, and may the beer be plentiful wherever you are now. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications for more content like this. Special shout out too to Mr. Jonathan Green, my patron in Patreon. If you would also like to support my channel and what I do here, you can check out my Patreon information in the description below, which also comes with info about my PayPal and Gcash, so you can make one-time donations. Alright, with all that out of the way, it's time to step onto the swamp and enter the Pet Sematary. It's that time of the year again, and I am briefly reminded of my younger years when I was but a child, and my family and I would sit at our living room while watching the evening news. To those of you unfamiliar with Filipino media and culture, during the hours between 5 to 7 at night, our local news would air scary stories about ghosts, ghouls, evil fairies, and more, disguised as news. We would all watch these strange, spooky, and occasionally hilarious shows on TV while eating popcorn or whatever snack was available at the time. My American grandfather, who did not understand Filipino, watched with us out of amusement at just how absurd the claims of some people would get, coupled with the very poor special effects used in some of the reenactment videos. Those were the days when I could say I was truly happy, even if, at the time at least, I was too much of a grumpy bear to realize it. But then, things started to change in the new tens, and tragedy happened after tragedy. In the beginning of 2010, my mother died of an illness she had been fighting for many years. Then my grandmother died in 2013 after a fatal fall while using the bathroom. Before his 90th birthday in 2016, my beloved grandfather died of multiple complications arising from bone cancer, thrombosis, and old age. Around the same year, my father too died a few weeks after a deadly stroke left him paralyzed. Being the only child, I was left alone after all their deaths, and, to this day, I long to be with them again. As I look back on those days, I remembered some of the books I've read in the past, especially those written by Stephen King. Pet Sematary, perhaps one of the first few books by Stephen King I've read, sprang to mind during my times of grief, and I couldn't help but wonder if I could find the fortitude to resist the evil in the story, given the losses I've suffered over the years. And, in the end, I realized that unless there was a strong, positive influence in my life, which I still don't have unfortunately, I most likely wouldn't be able to. Pet Sematary, published in 1983, is the story of a family who moves into Ludlow, Maine. The members of the family are Louis Creed, the father and the doctor, his wife Rachel, their daughter Ellie, the baby brother Gage, and their cat, Winston Churchill. The family is warmly welcomed by their neighbors, the Crandalls, an old couple comprised of Judd and Norma Crandall, who become quick friends with the Creeds. Judd Crandall eventually introduces Louis Creed to the Pet Sematary, which turns out to be just a graveyard for pets. The reason the place's name is misspelled is because it is a go-to place for children to bury their dead pets, and likely didn't know how to spell cemetery correctly. Judd also informs Louis that a lot of animals die from being run over by the large trucks passing through the highway just behind the Creed's home. While certainly somewhat creepy, nothing out of the ordinary happens at the Pet Sematary, and Louis dismisses the place from his mind after he and Judd leave it. However, a gruesome accident takes place, taking the life of a student named Victor Pascal. Being present at the scene, Louis is severely traumatized by the event, unable to remove memories of the young student and his awful wounds from his mind. What's worse is that, eventually, the ghost of Victor Pascal returns from the grave to haunt Louis during his sleep. However, unlike most ghosts, the student does not come to demand justice or to simply just scare the fatherly doctor. Instead, Pascal warns Louis about a place beyond the Pet Sematary that is blocked by tree branches and bush limbs called the Deadfall. Victor warns the father of the Creeds that no matter how much he may want to, he should never enter that place. Save for the nightmares brought about by the dead, or undead if you prefer, student, the Creeds and the Crandalls live their lives as normal until Norma Crandall, beloved wife of Judd, almost dies of a heart attack. Luckily though, Louis is able to save her life with his doctor's skills. Judd is very grateful for this and vows to help the Creeds in any way that he can in the times to come, which, unfortunately, leads to things taking a turn for the worst. The troubles begin with the death of Church, the Creed's cat who dies from being run over by a truck on the highway behind the Creed's house. With his daughter being so young, Louis is unable to find the courage to tell Ellie that her cat had died, since he didn't think she'd be ready for it. It is then that Judd offers Louis an alternative. Bury the cat's corpse in the place beyond the deadfall behind the Pet Sematary. The doctor learns that the place the older man is describing is actually an ancient Native American burial ground belonging to the Micmac tribe and has stood there for possibly centuries. Under Judd's instructions, Louis buries Church's mangled body in the ancient graveyard and, in the very next afternoon, finds that his daughter's cat had returned. Or has he? While the cat that returned from the grave and came to the Creed home certainly possessed Church's body, it had become aggressive and violent, killing wantonly, smelling like death, and behaved very strangely compared to the cat the Creeds had come to know and love. It got to the point that Ellie, who truly loved Church before his fatal accident, never wanted to be near the creature that seemed to look like her beloved cat. It is then that Judge informs Louis that he had once buried his dog in the same place many years ago out of sorrow and loneliness, but was doubtful that the creature that had returned to their home later was actually still the same dog. As if things couldn't get any worse, the Creed's youngest member, Gage, dies after getting run over by one of the trucks passing through the highways behind their home. This was a real fear that the author Stephen King had for his children, and claims that this had almost happened on one occasion. After a lot of drama, trauma, remembrance of more drama and trauma, and creation of even more drama and trauma by Louis Creed's obnoxious in-laws, the doctor decides to bury his baby son in the Micmac burial ground. Before things get worse, and after his in-laws try to make amends by letting the family go on vacation with them, Judd tries to have a long talk with Louis. The two discuss the true nature of the burial ground and what it could possibly be. The older man tells the story of Timmy Baterman, not the first human being to be buried in the Micmac cemetery, but what everyone hoped would be the last. A soldier slain on the battlefields of World War II, Timmy rose from the grave as a malevolent revenant, terrorizing people with unearthly knowledge. In the end, Timmy's father Bill had to kill him, again, to bring peace back to the town. Judd discusses there being an evil supernatural entity dwelling in the ancient graveyard, either living there to begin with, or was created or summoned through abominable acts of cannibalism. It is then that the older man implies that the dead have been resurrected from the Micmac burial ground are no longer who they once were, either being corrupted husks with evil and malice, or are possessed by evil spirits of some kind. Despite the warnings though, Louis went on his way to bury his son in the mystical graveyard anyway, and encounters a bizarre and horrifying creature moving about the place. While the doctor is fortunate not to see the monster, it is implied to be that of a Wendigo, a monster of Native American legend that is thought to be the spirit of a cannibal, or a spirit that inspires cannibalism in people. Louis manages to evade the vile creature, but the question arises whether or not the Wendigo simply let him go as he was doing exactly what it wanted. In the end, Louis is successful in burying his son in the Native American graveyard, and the very next day, Gage returns home as a monster that is able to speak and move like an adult, but is trapped in the body of a baby. Louis' wife, Rachel, returns home sensing something desperately wrong with her husband and his way of thinking, but arrives too late. She discovers that her husband's attempt at resurrecting their dead son has resulted in turning their youngest child into a monster who, by then, has already killed Judd, their family friend. Taken by surprise and unable to harm a creature that so obviously looked like her son, but speaks and acts nothing like him, Rachel is slain by the monster that Gage had become. After regaining a bit of his sanity, Louis kills both Church the cat and his son Gage again. This is when his mind completely breaks and somehow ages a few years older, gaining gray hair and wrinkles in the process. He then proceeds to bury his wife in the ancient graveyard as well, thinking that burying her faster will yield better results than that of his cat and son. Last we see of Louis is him embracing his now revived wife, with the latter clearly having malintent for him. Overall, while I can somewhat relate to Louis Creed and his sense of loss and despair, I would interpret the story of Pet Sematary as a cautionary tale against being obsessed with deceased loved ones. True, the pain of a departed is lingering and, at times, almost unbearable, but we must persevere in honor of them. After all, would our departed loved ones want to see us suffer for their sake? Anyway, that's it for this episode of Natural Juan. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, just subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. If you would also like to support my channel and what I do here, check for my Patreon information in the description below, which also comes with PayPal and GCash info for making quick, one-time donations. Natural Juan,